in there.
Oh, we got a whole PowerPoint. I love it.
Yeah, but yeah, redlining had a huge part to play in where the freeway went. You can actually just kind of follow the red line, the outside line of it, and that's exactly where the freeway went. And to get the red color on that map, basically the number one, like if there was a presence of the language that they use, if there's presence of Negroes in that neighborhood,
wow,
you would get a D rating on the it was the HOLC, the Homeowners Loan Corporation. So it was in the 30s. In response to the Great Depression, they were trying to figure out, what do we do? Keep going through, you'll see this one right here.
Yep.
So the red color is all redlined areas of St. Pete. So down in the south there, you'll see it's an industrial area. The Deuces, Midtown is what folks call it these days. And the rail line right there is that dotted line above D4. That's the old Orange Belt Railroad, not the Orange Belt, Suncoast Railway that is now the Pinellas Trail.
Yep.
So they converted that to a trail. But essentially, most of Pinellas County's African-American population lives in this section of St. Pete, the South CRA, now. And if you go to the first slide in this PowerPoint, you can kind of see, I just took a Sharpie and drew where the highway is kind of rudimentally, but the dotted line here, this is the map that they drew in 1931. The city had a plan to relocate all African Americans to this Negro segregation project. You can see at the top here, they had a goal of moving every black person in St. Pete to this district. And they almost accomplished it. They took Methodist Town, Peppertown, then they took the gas plant, which is north of the little spur there, which is 175. And the highway basically outlines the northern boundary of that. There was a goal that all the black people in St. Pete would live south of 6th Avenue South. And they almost accomplished it. They got pretty close.
So these are not arbitrary lines. This is a dedicated.
This dotted line was a true map that the city of St. Pete created.
And it says at the top of the map, proposed Negro segregation project.
Mm-hmm.
So they got their way, right? They got their way. They put the interstate through this black portion of St. Petersburg. And you still have a very obviously heavy black population kind of down in the southern part of St. Pete, which is, I think you mentioned you live there.
I do, yeah. I live in Campbell Park, so I'm in D7, down there, kind of on the edge with C6. Yeah, so it's eye-opening when you learn this about your city, and you learn that. So essentially, what redlining did was it denied the ability to get insurance on your property, and you therefore couldn't get a mortgage. How do you get a mortgage
if you lived within that red line?
So if you went to a bank and you're like, hi, I'd like to buy a house in this neighborhood, they'd be like, well, you can't get insurance because it's redlined, and so you can't get a mortgage.
And if you read the language of not just the redlining documents, but also housing, projects that were put together by the county and by the city at the time, the language is really inflammatory. It's purposefully saying people of this colored race live here. It's, the standards are poor. They use terms that are animalistic and, incredibly racist in the official documents that are part of the planning process for Hillsborough County and for Pinellas County in both cities. So the inflammatory and the purposefulness of these lines were drawn specifically for that purpose. It wasn't like they just drew something that made sense. This is targeted, and the language was it's awful.
And I've tried to make sense of it, and it comes down to us versus them. So this was the Great Depression. Home values had plummeted. People were struggling, and so I think white America was saying, well, if we don't succeed, then maybe black people will succeed. And so it was a zero-sum game. Yeah, which I think this plagues our country to this day. Is like, everyone thinks it's a zero-sum game. Like, if we let black people get ahead, then maybe white people won't.
An effort to save their community, they ruined another community. I guess that was the idea.
And you could look up, there's a really great book on this subject entirely, which is The Color of Law. And it's an incredible book that goes through the history of this in great detail. And, it's frustrating because it's not like this is gone and buried. The remnants of this, because of the nature of the speed at which cities change and the impacts that this has made on our country are felt today in really strong ways. And when you hear Secretary Buttigieg talking about racist infrastructure and racism in the built environment, he's talking about the legacy of these types of things. And it's frustrating because you hear some folks on the other side, specifically Governor DeSantis, saying, how can a highway be racist? Like, how can concrete be racist? It's just it's a lack of understanding the history and the
I have another
the
slide
reason
in
where
there.
we are where we are.
The FHA underwriting manual actually recommended cities build highways and arterial roads to divide white from black neighborhoods. It was a recommendation from the federal level. They said, build these roads to divide these two people together. So
there's so much talk today about systemic racism. I mean, this is exactly it.
It's the definition of it.
And
came from the top.
Although we don't have those policies today, they clearly are still expressed in the infrastructure of our society.
Yeah.
And it's such a shame that so much of politics is encompassed with this rhetoric where you can't even find a solution in it. There's so much talk about this sort of stuff. It almost is like the word racist is just thrown around so much. But dude, you're looking at a map that clearly displays the black community of a city, and whoever drew this up said, hey, put the highway right here and you don't have to deal with the black people. Keep them on that side of the highway. I mean, literally in the book, that's how it's written.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the idea that a highway can't be racist, well, maybe the highway itself, but certainly where it is, what it looks like.
And we can't say it was like the local leaders themselves. It was literally the manual, the book that was like, this is where you should put the road.
And local government loves that free federal money.
They do.
There was probably a lot of push and a lot of incentive as a local government to take that federal money and say, okay, I guess we'll put it there.
And the city council at the time was all white, of course.
Yeah. And, the white municipal party won mayoral elections for a very long time in both Tampa and St. Petersburg. So this is where I go to say that the freeways didn't cause this, but they were a tool, a method, that was one of many. And I bet you if you overlaid the redlining map with things like sidewalk gaps and lack of sewer and infrastructure and the quality of life elements like tree canopy and other things.
Pedestrian fatalities.
Fatalities are higher in all
life
of them.
expectancy.
Life expectancy is lower in all of them. Exactly.
Well, even crime too. Crime is isolated in these little pockets where it's all sheltered and surrounded by these interstates. When you have a connected community, a lit up, well connected community, a lot of that goes away. Mm-hmm. When everything's sheltered in one place with shitty roads and no sidewalks and bad infrastructure, well, of course, that's where the crime is going to concentrate.
This South Sierra, this red line district, it's been labeled as an area of concentrated poverty. There's a huge amount of poverty in that area. It's actually worse now than it was in the 60s when the Fair Housing Act passed in 1968. It's more concentrated poverty now. There's less black home ownership in that district now than there was then. Right. It's gotten worse. It hasn't gotten better. So we think, the time will heal all wounds. No, there was so much damage done. And the highways have a huge role. The deletion of generational wealth that could have been built in the black community, we deleted that. And that wealth did not come back. And the property value, if you look at the property values, if you just fold, so the cool thing about St. Pete, Central Avenue is like 0. Similar to Chicago. If you fold the map on Central Avenue, the addresses are the same on the north side as they are on the south side. So I live on 10th and 10th South. If you fold it, I have a map twin at 10th and 10th North. I can promise you that house is a Craftsman built in the 20s, like my house. It was a streetcar suburb. But the home value there is double. It's double.
Wow.
And so all of these black families that bought here in the 60s, when the Fair Housing Act was passed in the south side, thinking that they could, build wealth for their families, send their kids to college, all this, that equity hasn't quite made it to the south side. And the highway system, I believe, and I think the city would agree with me, is preventing that equity from making it to the south side. Mm-hmm. So the highway is preventing property values from reaching their full potential. I can walk downtown from my house. It's very difficult. That's the first thing I noticed when I moved in. I was like, I live 10 blocks from downtown, but it is so dangerous and so unpleasant for me to walk there by design. They wanted to separate the city in two, and they did it, and they accomplished it, and they prevented the south side from reaching its full potential.
Our equivalent here is places like Dobyville for example, which was essentially erased by the Selman Expressway. And that's essentially a freeway, a highway. It just has tolls on it. So, we have many of these examples on both sides of the bay. And this is where, the optimism side of this is that we can fix this. And it's a no pun intended, a great vehicle to capture that value and give it back to the people who have lost it over this,
Right.
Several generations, whether it's through a community land trust or building affordable housing or workforce development, you name it. The ability, I've even heard and seen some papers about people finding the descendants of the people who owned the land previously and finding a way to give them value back. So there's a way to fix it in an equitable way, and not just sort of getting folks back to baseline. There's a way to really allow a lot of upward mobility beyond just sort of getting to fair market value.
And so removing I-175, you believe would accelerate that economic output, the property value. The
we've seen it happen in
connectivity.
other cities,
With-
so we know it'll happen
With good stewardship, because if you were to just tomorrow turn the interstate off and delete it from the map, the market would take over and the value would skyrocket and gentrification would happen and displacement would happen. So big infrastructure and big planning, the same way it was detrimental for building the interstate, can be bad when you are doing good things too. So rather than displace the folks who have, I've worked in places now where the big dangerous roads that cause all kinds of health problems, people fight to keep them in their backyard because they're afraid of being pushed out if it's gone away and the value is increased too much too fast.
So the master plan for Reimagine 175 does include putting housing back where it was before. So you can kind of see the ghost of all the housing that used to be the yellow boxes where
Look at
175 is.
Wow. Hundreds, if not maybe thousands of
It's
properties.
north of 2,000 that were displaced by the freeway system in St. Pete.
2,000.
It was about 280 by this little yellow box right here.
So it could have been 5,000 or more people.
Yeah, it was very dense, like multi-generational
That's so many
homes,
people.
right?
That's like
That's crazy.
that's one block. What's crazy is if you go to the West Tampa part of 275, they've essentially taken 3. So take the number of houses and residents and cash registers and businesses in that yellow box and pull it up on Google Earth for West Tampa, and you'll just see how large the impact has been and was.
You go back to the slide before, it'll show you like a before and after.
Maybe
There's one-
forward.
this one right here.
Yeah, look at
So
that.
you can
man.
just see how much.
Wow.
like a whole
And
community
actually,
was there.
so the baseball field
That's
is
still there, yeah. So
right?
use the baseball as a point of reference.
So for
Campbell
people that
Park.
are just listening, it's essentially a modern Google map of 175 tearing through right south where the Tropicana field is, and then on the top is a picture of probably 1940s,
20s, 30s.
20s, 30s, early 20th century, and you have hundreds of homes, probably businesses too, corner stores,
So that's Fifth Avenue, kind of in the middle of the black and white.
all destroyed
And it's
for
the
the highway.
same Fifth Avenue there, the one way. On the north side of Fifth Avenue was Sugar Hill, the neighborhood I told you about. It was doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs. It was people had manicured lawns. It was like brick homes, stately big houses, and the city called it slum and blight. But there was nothing slum and blight about it. You
So-
can kind of see by the size of the houses up there. I mean, these are some nice houses.
And
Yeah.
this is what we've called in other places repeated trauma. So the interstate, in some places wasn't the original sin even. Sometimes it was a railroad that was put through. You get the term on the other side of the tracks from people putting railroads through redline communities and African American communities before there was redlining. So that sometimes led to the interstate going where it's going to. And then when the interstate gets built, it's unattractive, it's noisy, it's got a lot of cars, the geometry's funky, so the parcels are weird. So that's where people put their parking garages and their back of house and their steam plants and, their big arenas where you have to have a lot of 50,000 people coming in and out for big events, and their big parking lots for those big arenas.
It's so relevant that you say that because we just approved the gas plant redevelopment project in St. Pete, which has been many, many years in the making. And they are planning the stormwater retention to be right against the highway, the parking deck to be right against the highway. All the undesirable pieces of that development are going right along the highway.
Right. So when you repeat that trauma over and over again, because of the original sin of where the interstate is, it just further makes that neighborhood less and less likely to see investment, but also less and less desirable for people and less healthy for the people who live there now. So when you look at that aerial, just look how much surface parking and open space there is, because
That's all it is.
because nobody wants to live, or nobody should live that close to the interstate.
That makes sense.
This highway is unique because it's so small.
It is so small.
Josh actually called it could probably be the easiest highway removal project in the history of highway removals. Because
few miles, right?
It's 1.2.
It's a glorified exit.
Glorified exit
I
ramp.
mean, yeah, literally.
It doesn't take you anywhere. It just takes you it dumps you out at 4th Street. So
Well,
it's
and
from-
also too, the good thing about this whole project is you guys still have 375.
Yeah.
I think
So-
both should be fair game.
Well, of course,
But-
but I'm just saying,
yeah.
like in the context of just removing 175, it's not like there's not another exit
Yeah,
off
and the
275
toll
to
lanes
get
from
downtown.
275 are actually going to bring people to 375. So if you want to take the express lane, it will dump you out at 375.
So how would removing 175? First of all, let's just talk about the project. But my question was, how would it tie into this new gas plant district? Because I would imagine the conversation we're having about removing 175 totally plays into this new development.
Yeah,
of Tropicana Field.
the whole reason we're even here talking about it is because in 2016 they were starting to think about what happens at the end of the lease with the Rays. They were thinking they want a new stadium. They were looking at the whole site and surrounding, and they saw 175 and how it was underutilized. So it's only 40% capacity right now. So it's basically the size of 10 lanes, but we really only need 4. So there's 40,000 people using it, compared to 275, which is like 200s, thousands.
Wow.
So it truly is just an exit ramp.
Very long exit ramp.
Yeah, and the early on they looked at it in the Tropicana redevelopment plan in 2016. Kreisman, famously, Mayor Kreisman in 2021 championed to get this removed. The RFPs that were thrown around before Welch decided on Ray's Hines, a couple of them actually had the highway being removed.
Yeah, a couple of the new stadium
Yeah.
districts showed the freeway being removed.
Sugar Hill Partners had the freeway removed and the street grid reconnected. So St. Pete is famous for its street grid. And so from 16th to MLK, there used to be all these roads that would connect here. You can see 14th, 12th,
Right.
11th, 10th. So you'd be able to walk from Campbell Park into the gas plant. It used to be one big neighborhood. It was kind of hard to tell when the gas plant ended and when Campbell Park began. And so that street grid was disrupted. And so a big part of it is how do we reconnect the neighborhood in a way that brings equity to this neighborhood that was once connected. And it's going to be a major employment site. I think 10,000 people are going to live there. There's going to be thousands of jobs. $6 billion worth of investment is going into it. It's going to bring a lot of jobs to the area. And that's the biggest way that my community is going to benefit from it, is the wealth creation that could come from those good jobs. But we are not connected to it. So if you look like 16th Street, you go under an underpass, it's very unpleasant.
Good luck.
Yeah, it's just a bad time. And then MLK is an overpass, so with a 3-foot sidewalk.
No shade.
No shade.
I mean,
yeah,
one
it's
way.
just
So, Tyler,
unpleasant.
can you do Google Map? Just zoom into St. Pete, because I think even zooming out of this image on the bottom is important, because you really are so disconnected. Anyone that lives in the community down south like you, are you really going to walk to the gas plant district? I mean, maybe if you were really motivated.
It's very unpleasant.
Very unpleasant. It's
and
almost
especially
like
in the summer.
you're literally risking your life. I mean, literally. It's incredibly noisy. I mean, on a bike, I wouldn't do it on a bike or on foot.
MLK South is identified in our high injury network for Pinellas County, so it's a road that has a disproportionate number of people dying.
So zoom in right here on this image, Tyler.
It's important to remember too, the original plan for
then scroll south.
375 and 175 were supposed to go all the way to the beaches, and that never happened.
Thank
And
God.
They fought that, yeah.
And B, they were supposed to connect to one another and make a loop.
Yeah.
So
4th Street would have been a highway too.
4th Street would have been a freeway as well.
Now, with anything in America, there's like industry happening. There's these forces at play that are behind the curtain. Why would they want to take these highways all the way to the beach? Is it like the concrete lobbies at the table, the tire
That's
manufacturers?
another conversation. Yeah.
All of
That's probably
the
another
above.
whole podcast.
All of the
Yeah.
above.
But what are the forces at play today pushing for extra lanes. I mean, there has to be some sort of an interesting
There's a
incentive.
lobby still, right? Until
There's a major major lobbying
There's a
for
major
sure.
lobby.
For everything, asphalt, concrete, engineering,
Right.
you name it. I mean, the way that
car sales.
car sales, car insurance, the way that DOT is funded is that they get more money because they spend more money, and so the federal allocation process is sort of incentivizing just to build more.
So is it based on population of Florida? Maybe both?
Not necessarily population. It's complicated, but I couldn't explain it in a sentence. But it's basically if you build more, you get more.
That doesn't sound like a healthy incentive.
No, well, that's why
government.
that's
Not
why
sustainable.
that's why a lot of our maintenance, our bridges are A's and B's because we're constantly spending money to maintain things, whereas other states aren't. But
Another reason we're here is in 15 years or less, the redecking of 175 will be due, and it'll cost about $100 million.
concrete only has a certain lifespan.
Yeah. So
this
FDOT
thing
has
is
told
at the
me
end of its life
it's coming to the end of
anyway.
it. That's why we're here talking about it.
So if you didn't remove it and turn it into a boulevard or bury it or whatever option B would be,
Yeah.
we're going to have to, we're going to have to spend $100 million on redecking, reconcreting this exit ramp.
In
the
today's
glorified
dollars.
exit ramp.
So in 15 years, that could be, who
Oh
knows?
my God.
Yeah.
And then you don't factor in the opportunity cost of all the other
Yeah.
great things that you get
Yeah.
from it, and the lack of maintenance to pay for it in perpetuity.
And the boulevard would be the cheapest option because it's just a regular road. It's just
Right.
a street grade road. There's nothing fancy. There's no overpasses. There's no viaduct. There's no cap. It's just a regular road. FDOT could actually probably just give ownership of the road to the city or the county, and then they would be done with maintaining it. They would love that.
What does the city think? What do local politicians think about this idea?
Yeah. So I've had the opportunity to sit down with 6 out of 7 of our council members in St. Pete, and every single one of them was like, we have to do something about this road. We cannot leave it the way it is. What that looks like, they want to wait and see. There's a feasibility study. It's beginning this October with FDOT. They've already laid down the little rubber traffic counters to look at the road for the next 2 weeks. And then in October, they're going to be there presenting their traffic data. They're going to say, this is what's possible. One of the possibilities they've told us is going to hopefully be a boulevard. The other option is going to be a viaduct, kind of like 375. So the difference between 375 and 175, 375 is viaducted for most of its course. It's also shorter. And so you're able to pass underneath 375 a little bit easier. There's sight lines. It doesn't feel as walled off. 175, I've gotten confirmation from the city, was intentionally built as a wall from 16th Street to MLK with a concrete wall. Intentionally. So that commuters coming from outside of town would be able not have to look down at Midtown.
Wow.
They didn't want people to see the unpleasantness of Midtown.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it seems like they're optimistic.
Yeah. So they get the history. Everyone agrees that it's just overbuilt. It's huge. It's 450 feet wide. It's a mile long. It's huge. And there's depending on how you calculate it, 30 to 40 acres that could be reclaimed. So that's like the size of that parking lot next to Tropicana Field. That's about 40 acres right there.
Wow.
And that was valued at like $3 million an acre, something like that.
Right.
So the opportunity cost that Josh Frank talked about was, what are we missing out on if we wait another 10, 15 years and don't put housing there, and we end up needing to pay for maintenance on this? What is the lost opportunity there? The business districts that are continuing to flounder, like MLK South, you can't open a business there. It's a one-way street down to 9th Avenue. Nobody wants to open a business down there. It's just not a pleasant place for pedestrians or where you want to be, essentially.
Importantly, too, that same opportunity cost is true even in the replacement scenario. So, taking 375 or 175 out and replacing it with Ulmerton is not the same as taking it out and replacing it with, the Commonwealth Avenue in Boston, or some of the more beautiful streets that we have.
So what is the plan here? I mean, obviously there's going to be years of studies to formulate what it will exactly look like, but what is being proposed with your project?
So Reimagine 175 is advocating for a highway to boulevard conversion. So essentially take down 175 and rebuild it as a street grade boulevard.
So you have 3 lanes in each direction.
Probably just 2.
Two, 3, however that would work out.
Depending on what
Wide
the traffic study
sidewalks.
shows us. We have FDOT keeps track of all of the traffic data for all of their roads, and it's about 40,000 daily users, which is about the same as Park Boulevard.
Yep. Or Kennedy.
Or Kennedy, or sections of 34th Street. It's functioning like an arterial road. It's not functioning as an interstate. I don't anticipate them to find any new cars. I walk by it every day. I don't really ever see it. It's never congested. And it's a speedway, so you can go like 85, 90 on there.
You're going to have all the owners of the asphalt companies and the tire companies just zooming back and forth on 175 for the next few weeks.
To raise
And
the
then
counts.
when we do take it down, we already have 5th Avenue and 4th Avenue that are one-way pairs. Those have barely any car, like barely anybody's driving on those roads. So if you look at
So 5th is where? This one way to the
just south of
directly to the south.
175,
Got it.
and it changed. It's kind of confusing. There's like 2 5ths, but basically those pairs, that pair right there, that is actually big enough to handle the current traffic on 175. Just from me looking at,
Wow.
yeah.
So do we even need that road there at all?
I think if what we'll see is if we do decide to take it down, when we take it down, we're probably not even going to notice.
Right.
It's just people are just going to use 5th and 4th.
Right.
I don't think it'll even make any difference.
The logistics of it, the way it might actually, suss out is that the boulevard may actually be 5th Avenue South might become the boulevard, or that the boulevard, is considered 4th Ave South. And so you actually make one of those streets the primary streets. So that way the land is actually brought back as developable land.
What's the pushback on this locally?
So the biggest pushback, folks, we mentioned the evacuation routes, but interestingly, St. Pete just published its stormwater master plan, looking at the 100-year flood scenario. During the 100-year flood, which could be this, next week if we get a major hurricane, Booker Creek runs under 175.
Yep.
175 fills with 2 feet of water during a hurricane. So it does not function as an emergency evacuation route.
So that argument
So that's
is off
kind
the
of
table,
dead in the
so to
water.
speak.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the water.
Under the water.
Yeah.
There's also been some pushback from the hospital.
Yeah, hospital.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And
And I'm fortunate that I work at All Children's and Bayfront, so I've actually been able to sit down with them. I sat down with them last week.
Okay.
They have some new leadership since the last time they were approached about this in 2021. They are open-minded, is what they told me, to talking and looking at all options and hearing all proposals. I'm just one proposal, and so in my unique position I live, work, and play in the Southside and in the Innovation District essentially, and so I'm in a unique spot to advocate what my community wants. And I've gotten signed position statements from neighborhood associations all surrounding the highway. So I have Roser Park, which is just south of the highway there, Campbell Park, Harbordale a little further south, Palmetto Park, all have signed position statements supporting modifying this road to be safer. And Roser Park actually specifically wants a boulevard, in Campbell Park as well. So we're just continuing our advocacy work right now and educating people. It's complicated, right? Like you have to listen to a podcast, you have to read a little bit. Traffic engineering is not simple.
Mm-hmm. But it doesn't sound like there's this overwhelming pushback. It almost sounds like the leaders of St. Pete recognize the importance of moving in this sort of direction.
the challenge is going to be with DOT,
DOT.
and losing capacity. Anytime that capacity for cars is decreased, it's sort of a red flag. And it's something that, more often lately has been on the table, but hasn't been as frequent. You could just look at, for example, at the Drew Street conversation that happened in Clearwater to try and reduce a lane on Drew Street, and the pushback that came from the community there, and DOT sort of wavering on it there. So I think right now DOT might be a little agnostic, but as soon as they see how it's going to impact some of the other corridors in their model, which I would disagree with the results of that model, then we might see a little bit of opposition from DOT. And that's why I was joking about Ulmerton Boulevard or Ulmerton Road, because that's what they're going to want to do. They're going to want to make it 6 lanes, 3 in either direction with
And interstate with
really
stoplights.
wide. Right, exactly. Interstate on the ground. So
What is the how has Syracuse been able to get it done? How did Seattle get it done? How have other places around the country moved forward with a plan like this?
good question. So I'll speak to Syracuse just because I'm most familiar with it. Our office is designing the city's vision plan for what they're calling the community grid, which is to not just take out I-81, but I-81 and to rethink all the other things that the interstate has touched. All the one-way pairs, all the blown out roads to, road diet those, et cetera. So Syracuse is unique in that their DOT, first of all, is really, it has made the decision that this is the right way to go. Getting to that point alone is an incredible feat for them to say, yes, this is the right decision. So for them, it really started with the community pushing for something better a decade ago. And that included groups like the New York Civil Liberties Union, the downtown, the New Urbanists, you pick, there was a unified front, and the elected officials saying there's a better way forward.
Wow. So a massive public
It has
push
to be
to do
huge.
this.
So to get 175 taken down, it will be a lot of political will have to be put out there. So like it has to be unanimous. It has to be the city, the Chamber of Commerce, local politicians. It has to be supported by the community, which it is, which we know.
The local community.
The local
Because
community.
the challenge here will be the same as it was in Tampa, as it is in Syracuse and everywhere else, is that this is, for a lot of folks who don't live within the shadow of the interstate, their way to work or their way to a baseball game or whatever. And so even in Syracuse, where the decision was made, the exurbs, all the communities around Syracuse sued the state over the decision, because they felt like they were going to be harmed economically by travel times and by congestion and all the other, associated things they perceived as what was going to happen with the removal. So, the folks within the shadows of the interstates will probably always be in favor of removing it, except for the case where they're maybe afraid of gentrification and displacement. But the real challenge is for the folks that live on the beaches, that live in North Pinellas, who are saying, you can't take that away. That's how I get to St. Pete. St. Pete's just as much for me as it is for you. And that is where the political side of the conversation always ends up, is sort of the commuters versus the folks at the community.
Right.
There's been a lot of pushback in Tallahassee lately too, with lane removal for like BRT lanes, like bus rapid transit lanes.
Right.
So they tried to get one for 34th Street South in St. Pete, and just Tallahassee just is not open to considering taking away travel lanes at this time. The Sunrunner is a good case example of the success of a lane repurposing. They took a lane from First Avenue North and South for the Sunrunner and for turning, and the Sunrunner has been a huge success. It has like very high ridership. It's just going up, and the road actually became safer when they added the bus lane. So they took away a road or a lane for cars, but they saw less crashes, and it actually did not increase travel times. It actually decreased travel times a little bit.
I had Brad Miller on the podcast.
Yeah,
He's
he
the
talked
CEO
about that.
of
Yeah.
PSTA.
Yeah, I listened to that one.
He's a super man to have such like a passionate and energetic transit, and I use the word in a light way, nerd, right? About this subject. What a guy, right?
Yeah.
And his efforts to put that the Sunrunner in. When you go to downtown St. Pete, they've got the accessible area for wheelchairs. It's all nice. It's shaded. They have that dedicated lane. Because we talk about rail a lot on the show, and people get really heated if you don't mention it. But I talked to Brad Miller about rail, and he was like, honestly, the BRT, it kind of is a rail system. It's a dedicated lane. Yep. It doesn't necessarily have to deal with traffic like a regular bus would. You can time it with traffic lights to make it super efficient. He's like, in terms of funding, in terms of politics, BRT cheaper, right? Yeah. BRT is kind of the way to go.
Yeah,
it can be, and it's also really easy to convert a BRT line into a streetcar line in the future, because if you design it for that in mind, it's not that hard to put some rails in. The only challenge to that is from a economics standpoint. It depends on the amount of investment, but the Sunrunner is a good example because it was a lot of investment to get the stations and to get it all set up, including the land use and other things around the stations. But if you were just to throw a BRT line on, Dale Mabry or US 19 or something, without anything else, developers and affordable housing and all the other things that will follow it are less likely to happen because there's less skin in the game. It's a little hard to put in rails, physical rails, and then 5 years later, when the funding has problems, to take the rails out. The rails are likely going to be in there for a while because they're expensive.
Right.
So there's a level of commitment to putting rails in the ground that BRT doesn't have, but it can get really close.
We have the permanent stations for the Sunrunner, which,
That's right.
which is giving people a lot of faith in like where those permanent stations are. We're seeing a huge amount of development around those, and the city's upzoning around Sunrunner stations to allow more density.
Right. Those 3,000 properties that are being upzoned around Central Avenue.
Yep.
It really is an interesting case study in St. Pete. I think in a lot of ways, Tampa is behind on a lot of this sort of stuff.
We tried with Metro Rapid, and that's a good case study in the opposite direction, where the stations were kind of put on Nebraska Ave, and not a whole lot else was done. They were supposed to have signal prioritization and timing. FDOT wouldn't do it, so because it would mess up the interstate timing and the exits for the interstate. So I think they're working on getting that back and hopefully providing prioritization for the Metro Rapid. But that's a BRT project. It's got its own branded buses, its own branded stations. They're somewhat permanent. So
transit has become political in the last couple of years, and it's so fascinating to me. It just doesn't. Oh, this is a good picture of. This is your perspective if you're in Campbell Park and you're a kid playing Little League football. That's the wall that separates downtown St. Pete from Campbell Park.
A literal wall.
It's a literal wall. It's concrete. It's huge. And that's before we begged them to pressure wash it because the kids were like having to look at that every day.
Keep the damn thing clean at least.
And the message, and
God.
that's a Tropicana field. That's it's
ridiculous.
And there's gonna be $6 billion
dirty highway.
$6 billion dropped right there behind that wall.
Yeah. And there's a lot of scientific articles and journals out there about sound walls, even as a specific subject. It's junk science.
Yeah.
At best, during good weather, maybe there's a couple decibels difference, but they cost $1 million a mile.
Oh my God!
So
I was going to ask, how much does that cost?
It can.
Sound barrier. I saw on 275 they're putting up these huge concrete barriers on either side. We'll see what that
They
does.
can even
I
amplify
can't imagine
sound.
living in a wooden bungalow with an interstate right next door. You're going to hear it no matter how tall that sound wall is.
Yep.
Anything else on 175? I do want to talk about Ashley, and then we can wrap.
Yeah. So my website's reimagine175.com. Give me a visit. Scroll down to the bottom. All my socials are at the bottom, or our socials. Feasibility starts this fall. So if you do live in St. Pete, particularly in the neighborhoods around there, send me a message and I'll keep you updated on the community engagements that are going to be happening with FDOT. There's going to be 30-something community engagements, which is great.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, they really want to know what people want. It's also good because it's going to take a year or two to get all that done. And I'm hoping that we have maybe some new leadership in Tallahassee by then, because it may require that to do a project like this. This would be the first interstate removal in the history of Florida.
I was going to ask if this was would be the first one.
The first like true taking down an interstate. And it's one of the smallest, and it's one of the most divisive, and it's in a city that's, growing rapidly. I mean, we all love St. Pete, right? So it's just super exciting, and it's going to make lives better immediately. If we do decide to stop using this thing, it's the day that we shut it off, air quality is going to get better. Our streets are going to be safer. We see just like a huge number of fatalities on our roads surrounding 175, mostly because of the one-way pairs that feed it. So immediately we're going to see some huge improvements. And then the future boulevard, I mean, just we invite you to imagine along with us, like, what does that look like to you? We imagine it with a tree canopy, multimodal transportation, a bus lane, maybe a way for emergency vehicles to get to the hospital in a dedicated way, protected bike lanes, like just transit. Like, what do you see there? One council member even said, like, what if we did a multimodal transit center there? What if that could be a train station? What if Brightline could come to St. Pete? Like, let's think big, Tampa's going to get it in the next 3 years, right? And so St. Pete's going to be the next one to start talking about how do we connect the region in a better way. I think all the pieces are there. Like, I think it's all coming together.
I did my version as a fun exercise. We have a sketch that you sent, if you want to pull that up, just to show you literally what it could potentially look like.
Yeah, let's see this thing. Because I think, I mean, like Brightline, right? There's been some plans, like FDOT has put the correct infrastructure in place to have light rail over the new Howard Franklin. I mean, the infrastructure is getting close to a point where you could kind of put a picture in your head of what things could look like.
And this, the center of gravity of downtown St. Pete keeps on moving west. So downtown used to be just 4th Street over east. Now, the gas plant's going to be an entirely new neighborhood.
That's it.
Yeah, so downtown just keeps growing, right? And so north of the Trop is the Edge District, which is known for kind of its like funky boutique coffee shop vibes. West of that is the Grand Central. So downtown St. Pete is almost 34 blocks now. It almost goes all the way to US 19. So the gas plant is probably, they want it to be the center of gravity for downtown and kind of like the arrival point. You come off the freeway, you exit the freeway, hopefully, and you enter onto a boulevard, and you're in the city, and if you're in a car, you're there on a beautiful boulevard. And all this yellow is where Josh drew the land that could be reclaimed, essentially.
It's so much property
It's a
for
lot of
people
land.
just listening. I think you mentioned 40 acres, but this would be much more than that, right?
It's a half of another Trop site.
Yeah,
Crazy.
that whole parking lot you see there next to the Trop.
This is
that
so
thing.
much land. And, you know, just a roadway, a boulevard in the middle of that would only take up so much. You would still have room for parks and for potentially land too. I mean, the city could partner with developers and actually add to the gas plant, you know? And I think most importantly, and really the whole reason we're having this conversation, and I see, Josh, you've done this, is the connectivity.
Yep.
Reconnecting those north and south avenues, or streets all along a road where we're now, I mean, what do you have? Like 3 maybe places where you can go
One every half mile.
One every half mile.
There's 7 blocks from 16th to 9th. There's a pedestrian bridge that goes over, but it is the saddest pedestrian bridge you've ever seen.
I mean, now you're talking about what, 15 places you can cross over into the north side of this area.
And I will say, this isn't like set in stone. This isn't a proposal. This is just me and Josh are just having fun. We're volunteering our time. What happens there is going to be depending on what the community wants, what the neighbors want. This is just showing you how much land the highway takes up, essentially. Which roads are connected will be determined at a later date.
This is the maximum scenario. Where you know, two lane roads carry more traffic than one 4-lane road. So, you know, the more grid that you can have, the more connectivity that you have, the actually more capacity that you can create. That only gets further with more mixed use, right? You don't have to make a trip for everything. So,
and then intersection density is really important too, right? With the economic output. So the more intersections you give a city, the more options you give for people to how to get around, the more, you know, the innovation district could be expanded. The, you know, housing could be put in there. We could have more green space. We're going to have to do it in a very equitable way to make sure that residents in the Southside, if they do want to, you know, age in place, if they want to move into some new housing, that they have the option and they have the first rights to be able to do that. The gas plant redevelopment, you know, has a component of affordable housing, but a lot of folks complain that it's not restorative enough. And so this project offers quite a bit of restorative justice to the people that were displaced that used to live in the gas plant and in Campbell Park and in Sugar Hill. It's just a really remarkable once in a generation chance to just simply like do the right thing. A lot of people ask me like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you spending so much time on, and this could take 15 years. It's just simply the right thing to do. And that's enough for me, you know, like, and I'm going to be living in
at the right time too.
Yeah. And I'm going to be living in my house forever. I live right there. And like, I'm going to be in St. Pete forever. And I just want to see it grow in an equitable way. And I want to see everyone thrive. And
2 huge factors are, one is the gas plant redevelopment. I mean, having this conversation now as these approvals are taking place and as those plans are getting together is so important. Number one. Number two, the fact that you guys are going to have to re-concrete and repave all that road and spend God knows what anyway, like now is the time to have this conversation.
Yeah. One neighbor was like, well, what about the construction noise? And I was like, well, we have 20 years of construction for the gas plant.
Right.
They're putting shovels in the ground this fall, I think. So what if we could time it all together, get it done, get that neighborhood connected back together again, and the benefits, they'll be immediate. Because the thing that people love about St. Pete is its walkability, its connectivity, and that vibe that St. Pete has, that that vibrancy, and it's the people. And so if we can get people connected back together again, I mean, that's just massive.
If it weren't for the gas plant district, this decision would be the single biggest decision the city has ever made in order to solve its challenges. It impacts every element of people's lives in that way. And it's something that most cities don't get the chance to rethink. And if they do, it's because of something traumatic, like an environmental disaster or war or something else that has traumatized their city in a way that they have no choice. So to proactively think about how can we do the best we can with the limited footprint of what this place is, leaves you with really no other option, no other alternative.
I call 175 a scar, and healing that scar it's such a big thing, right?
It sounds like the most important thing to have this conversation is with the community. Like you mentioned in Syracuse, the reason why they were successful is because of that community engagement, the political engagement. Is there an event coming up you can announce? I know you mentioned 30 community meetings, which is so many.
As soon as I get the agenda for those meetings.
Who made the call to have 30 meetings?
So Forward Pinellas has been very much involved. With
Forward Pinellas?
Forward Pinellas is our metropolitan planning organization. Yeah.
Okay.
They have been involved with getting the community planning sessions planned out. So as soon as I get those dates, I'm going to be posting everywhere, and I want a Boulevard fan at every community engagement.
Hell yeah, man!
Because I just think it's the one option that offers the most benefit for the community. I don't think the other options do the restorative component in quite the same way.
So Forward Pinellas is the group kind of helping have this conversation to find a solution.
They steer us in the right direction.
Forward Pinellas is Pinellas County's metropolitan planning organization. They're a government entity established to essentially be the countywide level transportation planning organization.
Okay.
So we have our TPO in Hillsborough County, which is made up of, city council members from Tampa, Temple Terrace, Plant City. It's made up of county commissioners. It's got a few other folks on it. Pinellas is similar in that, there's 24 other municipalities outside of St. Pete and Clearwater. So
we're getting a regional MPO soon. I think
maybe
in the next couple of years, hopefully.
Maybe.
Right?
God,
we need one really bad.
You and I might have to debate on that one.
Okay.
I don't know if I would say I'm hopeful about that, but
why? Is there too much fighting, county to county, municipalities?
I'm concerned for a couple reasons. The chief among them is, I think it deminimizes the weight that Hillsborough County and the city of Tampa has on their own future. If you put them in a pot with Pasco and Pinellas and all the other folks that maybe have a different mindset.
That makes sense.
But there are benefits too. Don't get me wrong.
Well, there certainly should be a regional conversation being had.
That's what T-BARTA used to be before it was collapsed by the state. And so, there is a little bit of a vacuum.
There's
dark side too.
Yeah.
I was Hillsborough County's rep on the CAC for T-BARTA, and so I had a firsthand glimpse into that. But yeah, you're right. There is that level sort of missing.
We have a huge number of regional commuters, right, that drive into St. Pete or drive into Tampa, like a big number. And so we got to make it easier, right?
It would also make us the largest MPO in the state.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Which I'm not sure if bigger is better in this case, but
yeah, I don't know. Well, we're towards the end of this thing. I know Tyler's got to split out soon. Let's talk about Ashley Drive, as brief as we can. That's on the table. How did that whole thing begin? Why is the conversation being had right now to remove and replace, or what's going on at Ashley Drive?
It's a good question. I know a little bit about that, but not a lot.
I thought you were working on it.
I was, but I'm not any longer. So it's important to remember that the Ashley Drive project is from one bucket of what's called the Reconnecting Communities Act. So the Fed, the USDOT passed in the infrastructure bill a small, not small, but a small by the whole bill standards pot of money that was divided into two groups for either reconnecting communities planning or reconstruction. So I had a very small piece in writing some of that early legislation that existed in the previous administration's bills. So it's been in the works for a while, but it's finally approved and it's law and it's available. So we're on like the third round of funding, notice of funding opportunities. City of Tampa and Hillsborough County both applied for reconnecting communities funding. City of Tampa, for Ashley and Hillsborough County for the Boulevard Tampa study. The politics changed at the county level for Hillsborough County, so they rescinded their Boulevard Tampa grant application, and the city kept theirs. So the city was awarded $5.3 million to redesign Ashley. Essentially, what they're going to do is take the Ashley exit, which is downtown, is elevated, goes over Laurel, goes over some streets as a viaduct. They're going to bring it down to grade in a couple places and reconnect some streets.